Over 60% of Canadians say they're living paycheck to paycheck, and household debt is now higher than the entire GDP. If the economy crashes, some cities won't just struggle, they'll collapse. What if your hometown was one of them? This isn't fear-mongering, it's reality. Some of Canada's most popular cities are sitting on economic fault lines. Rising housing bubbles, job markets on life support, and local governments drowning in debt. And yet, no one's talking about which cities would fall first. Until now. In this video, we're counting down the 10 Canadian cities most likely to crumble first if the economy takes a nosedive. Some are already showing cracks, others may surprise you. So, is your city on the list? Let's find out. Number 10. Sudbury, Ontario. Sudbury might not be the first city that comes to mind during an economic crisis, but that's exactly why it's at risk. This northern Ontario city has long been the heart of Canada's nickel mining industry. For decades, its economy has revolved around mineral extraction, particularly for global giants like Vale. But here's the problem. Sudbury's heavy dependence on the mining sector makes it incredibly vulnerable to global commodity prices. If demand drops, especially from China or the US, Sudbury's local economy could spiral fast. Mining booms create jobs and local revenue, but they also leave cities exposed. Sudbury has tried to diversify with education and healthcare, but those sectors aren't big enough to balance out the risk. According to data from Ontario's Ministry of Labour, any sustained downturn in global nickel demand could cut thousands of jobs almost overnight. The city is also facing demographic stress. Young people continue to leave for bigger urban centres, leaving behind an aging population with rising healthcare needs and fewer taxpayers to support them. Add to that the city's infrastructure, which is aging and expensive to maintain, and you've got a fragile setup that lacks resilience. Even Sudbury's real estate market shows signs of volatility. While housing prices remain relatively low compared to cities like Toronto or Vancouver, that also means there's less equity to draw from in times of crisis. If the job market shrinks and incomes decline, even modest mortgages become unaffordable. Now picture an economic crash where global demand for metals dries up, investment halts, and local employment disappears within months. Sudbury's local government would struggle to respond. Businesses would close, social services would be overwhelmed, and long-term recovery could take years. That's why Sudbury earns the number 10 spot. It's not geography, it's fragility. Number 9. St. John, New Brunswick. At number 9, we have St. John, New Brunswick, a historic port city with a proud industrial legacy, but a fragile economic future. St. John is the oldest incorporated city in Canada, and for decades it thrived on shipbuilding, oil refining, and heavy industry. But as the world shifts to greener energy and digital economies, St. John is struggling to adapt. Today, the city's economic core is narrow, centered on just a few major employers like the Irving Oil Refinery and Port St. John. If even one of those pillars falters, the consequences could ripple fast. One major red flag is the outmigration of its working-age population. Many young professionals leave St. John for better opportunities in larger cities, and the result is a shrinking tax base combined with an aging population. That puts enormous pressure on local healthcare, pensions, and social services, especially if a national downturn tightens budgets. The housing market here is also deceptively risky. While prices are lower than the national average, they've risen sharply since the pandemic, driven more by investor speculation than local wage growth. If interest rates spike or employment weakens, many new homeowners could find themselves underwater fast. Unemployment in St. John remains consistently higher than the national average. And while the city has tried to attract tech startups and diversify, the transition has been slow and patchy. Without strong internal economic engines, St. John relies heavily on provincial and federal support, something that could dry up in a broader recession. So if Canada's economy crashes, St. John may not have the momentum or diversity to weather the storm. Does this surprise you? Is St. John your hometown or somewhere you've lived? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're finding this eye-opening, hit that subscribe button for more deep dives on Canada's urban future. Number 8. Windsor, Ontario. Windsor is a city that wears its working-class pride on its sleeve. Sitting across the river from Detroit, it's built on the back of factories, sweat and steel. But under the surface, it's more fragile than most would admit. This is the automotive capital of Canada. That sounds strong, until you realize how deeply its fate is tied to just one sector. Cars, trucks, supply chains that stretch across borders. If the US economy stalls or global demand for vehicles dips, Windsor feels it like a punch to the gut. We've seen this before. The 2008 recession hit Windsor harder than almost anywhere in the country. Unemployment soared into double digits. Manufacturing jobs vanished overnight. The local economy collapsed like dominoes. Families left, homes were abandoned, and although the city has since rebounded somewhat, the cracks remain. What's changed since then? Not as much as you'd think. The auto sector still dominates. A few tech and green energy startups have emerged, but they're small in comparison. There's also the issue of personal debt. Windsor households carry some of the highest levels in Ontario. If interest rates climb during a downturn, many residents could quickly find themselves in financial freefall. Windsor's location, once a strength, can also turn into a weakness. Cross-border trade depends on economic harmony between two countries. If either side falters, everything slows. Traffic, trade, employment. People here are resilient. That's undeniable. But resilience doesn't change math. And when an economy is this concentrated and this exposed, all it takes is one shock to bring it down again. That's why Windsor makes this list. Not because its people aren't tough, but because the system they're in may not be tough enough to survive what's coming next. Number 7. Thunder Bay, Ontario. There's a quietness to Thunder Bay. It's far from Canada's biggest cities, tucked on the edge of Lake Superior, surrounded by endless forest and vast skies. At first glance, it feels distant from the chaos of economic downturns, but that distance is part of the danger. Thunder Bay was once a vital transportation and shipping hub, the gateway between the prairies and the Great Lakes. But the decline of manufacturing and the rise of automated logistics have reduced its role dramatically. The economy hasn't collapsed, it's just slowed, quietly, year after year. And that's the problem. A large portion of Thunder Bay's economy is now centered on government services, healthcare, and education. Those jobs are relatively stable, until they aren't. In a national recession, government austerity often hits places like Thunder Bay first. Budgets shrink, jobs get cut, local businesses close as spending dries up, and the city's isolation, it means recovery is harder. New industries don't land here easily. Youth often leave after high school and don't return. Population growth is stagnant, and in some years even negative. That means fewer taxpayers, aging infrastructure, and growing pressure on social systems. Then there's housing. Prices here are lower than in major urban centers, but that affordability masks a lack of new development and investment. In a crash, property values could sink further, pushing homeowners underwater and eroding household wealth. Thunder Bay isn't dramatic, it won't crash overnight. But it's vulnerable in slower, more dangerous ways. Quiet decline can be just as deadly as a sudden collapse. And when support systems thin out during a broader crisis, cities like Thunder Bay often fall through the cracks. That's why it lands at number 7, not because it's loud, but because it's forgotten. Number 6. Regina, Saskatchewan. Regina might not look unstable from a distance. It's the capital of Saskatchewan, home to government offices, universities, and major agricultural businesses. But beneath that image of prairie calm lies a city that's far more exposed than most realize. At the heart of Regina's vulnerability is its dependence on just two sectors, oil and agriculture. Both are highly cyclical. When times are good, Regina thrives. But when global oil prices tumble or droughts hammer crop yields, the city's economy can't hide from the fallout. The energy sector, once a major source of employment, has seen sharp declines in recent years, especially as oil demand falters and investment moves toward renewables. That leaves Regina more reliant than ever on farming, which is increasingly unstable due to climate extremes and global trade uncertainty. Add to that the growing automation in agriculture, and even traditional rural employment starts to dry up. And here's another issue: municipal debt. Like many mid-sized Canadian cities, Regina took on considerable infrastructure spending after the pandemic. While that investment was necessary, It has left the city financially stretched. If provincial transfers decline in a recession, the city may be forced to cut back services or raise taxes, both of which fuel economic strain. There's also a growing housing affordability gap. Regina doesn't have the extreme prices of Vancouver or Toronto, but local wages haven't kept up with cost of living increases. A spike in unemployment could quickly tip many households into default. Regina's risk isn't dramatic collapse. It's the slow erosion of economic pillars that used to feel solid. And in a serious downturn, the city's limited industrial diversity and fiscal space could leave it without a safety net. That's why Regina sits firmly at number 6. Number 5. Kelowna, British Columbia. Kelowna looks like a dream. Crystal clear lakes, vineyards under the sun, mountain views in every direction. It's a postcard city, drawing in retirees, remote workers, and tourists by the thousands. But if Canada's economy crashes, this dream could turn into a trap. The city's economy is heavily weighted toward real estate, tourism, and services. In other words, industries that depend on outside money. Kelowna has been booming, but that boom has come with a cost. Sky-high housing prices, over-leveraged households, and an economy that doesn't actually produce enough high-paying, stable jobs for its own residents. The truth is, many of the people who live and work in Kelowna can barely afford it. The affordability crisis has pushed locals to the financial edge, and in the event of a recession, that edge gets razor-thin. If tourism dries up, or if real estate investors pull back, there's little to catch the fall. The tech sector is growing, yes, but slowly, and it's not nearly enough to offset the city's dependence on sectors sensitive to economic shocks. Construction, for instance, has been booming, but that too is tied to speculative real estate. A housing slowdown could stall the entire momentum. Meanwhile, climate risk looms large. Wildfires are becoming a near-annual threat in the Okanagan Valley. Insurance costs are rising, and emergency spending is eating into local budgets. An economic downturn combined with a severe fire season could stretch the city's resources to the breaking point. Kelowna is beautiful, but beauty doesn't pay bills or build economic resilience. Behind the lakefront condos and orchard trails lies a city that could fall faster than most imagine. That's why Kelowna lands at number 5. Number 4. Edmonton, Alberta. Edmonton is a city that doesn't shy away from ambition. Skyscrapers, sprawling suburbs, billion-dollar infrastructure projects. It's a place that thinks big. But in an economic crash, that boldness could backfire. The city's economy is deeply tethered to oil and gas. When energy prices are strong, Edmonton roars. But when they collapse, like they did in 2015 and again during the pandemic, the impact is brutal. Job losses pile up, housing demand freezes, and consumer spending plummets. What makes Edmonton even more vulnerable is the size of its commitments. The city has poured billions into new developments, transit lines, hospitals, downtown revitalization. These are long-term investments, but they rely on consistent economic growth and tax revenue to be sustainable. If revenues drop suddenly, Edmonton could be forced to delay or cancel services, just when its citizens need them most. There's also the issue of rising inequality. Edmonton has seen a significant increase in homelessness and housing insecurity in recent years. In 2023, shelters reported record usage, and social services were stretched to capacity. In a nationwide recession, these challenges would only deepen, and fast. While efforts are being made to diversify the economy with tech and education, those sectors are still small. Oil still casts a long shadow over Edmonton's fortunes. And unlike Calgary, which has aggressively repositioned itself in recent years, Edmonton's transformation has been slower. If a crash comes, it won't just hurt Edmonton's economy, it will shake its identity. A city that's built so much, so quickly, could find itself holding a lot of risk and very little room to maneuver. That's why Edmonton lands at number 4. Ambition is powerful, but when built on volatility, it can turn into a liability. Number 3. Brampton, Ontario. Brampton is booming. It's one of Canada's fastest-growing cities, with over 650,000 residents and counting. But that growth is a double-edged sword, and in a serious economic crash, it could cut deep. The city has expanded rapidly over the past 2 decades. New developments, rising home prices, and a surging population have transformed it from suburb to major urban hub. But much of that transformation has been fueled by debt, both personal and municipal. Families are stretched thin trying to afford homes, and the city itself is playing catch-up with essential infrastructure: schools, hospitals, and transit. Brampton has a large immigrant population, many of whom work in transportation, manufacturing, and service industries, sectors that are highly vulnerable to layoffs in an economic downturn. In a crash, the ripple effects here would be swift and painful: job losses, mortgage defaults, and increasing pressure on already strained public services. And while housing values have made some residents wealthy on paper, the reality is more fragile. A sudden drop in real estate could leave homeowners over-leveraged, especially those who bought in at peak prices. Meanwhile, renters would face rising costs and fewer job options, making recovery even harder. The city's explosive growth also masks a lack of economic diversity. Unlike Toronto or Mississauga, Brampton doesn't have a deep base of high-paying tech or finance jobs to cushion against a downturn, and its infrastructure, from hospitals to roads, is under immense pressure. Brampton isn't failing, but it's stretched, and when a stretched system meets a shock, collapse becomes more than just a possibility. Number 2. Halifax, Nova Scotia. Halifax has become something of a rising star in recent years. With a booming housing market, a young and educated population, and a growing tech scene, it's drawn attention as one of Canada's next big urban stories. But behind the glow lies a vulnerability that makes Halifax especially exposed in the event of a crash. The city's economy is heavily driven by the public sector, government jobs, education, and healthcare. And while these can seem stable, they're also budget-dependent. If the federal or provincial government slashes spending in response to a national recession, Halifax could be among the hardest hit. Another growing concern is real estate. Halifax saw one of the sharpest spikes in home prices during the pandemic, fueled by an influx of remote workers and investors. But wage growth hasn't kept pace. This has left many locals priced out of their own city and homeowners sitting on fragile equity. In a downturn, a sharp correction in housing could ripple through the entire economy. Halifax is also highly dependent on external income, through tourism, education, and remote work dollars. All of those can dry up fast in a recession. International students leave. Tourists cancel, spending slows. At the same time, infrastructure is straining. Transit lags behind population growth, rental vacancies are near zero, and emergency services are stretched. In normal times, this is frustrating. In a crisis, it becomes dangerous. Halifax has potential. It's dynamic and full of talent. But its rise has been fast, and a sudden shock could reveal just how unsteady the foundation still is. Number 1. Vancouver, British Columbia. Vancouver is stunning, and it knows it. Mountains, ocean, skyline. It's one of the most livable cities on Earth, but behind that beauty lies a financial structure so fragile it could be the first to break if Canada's economy crashes. The city's economy leans heavily on real estate, not just as a sector, but as its backbone. Housing isn't just where people live, it's the engine of local wealth, the magnet for investment, and the store of personal security. The problem? It's built on borrowed money. Vancouver has some of the highest home prices in the world relative to income. According to RBC, the average family would need nearly 90% of its income just to cover mortgage payments on a typical home. That's unsustainable in good times and dangerous in bad ones. If the housing market corrects, the effect would be swift and severe: equity wiped out, construction halted, consumer spending slashed, and defaults rising. But it wouldn't stop at housing. Vancouver's economy is deeply globalized. Tourism, international students, and foreign capital all play massive roles. A global downturn could dry up those income streams overnight. Add to that the city's growing population of precariously housed renters and recent spikes in homelessness, and you have a crisis ready to ignite. Climate risk is another overlooked threat. With rising sea levels, wildfire smoke, and extreme weather, insurance costs are rising, and those shocks strain city services even further. Even small financial tremors cause ripples in Vancouver. A major crash? That's a full-scale earthquake. And with so much local, personal, and national wealth tied up in its real estate market, a collapse here wouldn't stay local for long. That's why Vancouver is number one, the most beautiful and the most brittle. Before you go, we want to hear from you. Which city do you think is the most at risk, and did we miss any that should have made the list? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. If you found this eye-opening, check out our last video. It's the perfect companion to this one. We pour hours of research and editing into every video. Your support means the world, so hit that subscribe button. It's just one click, but it helps us keep going.